Cool. Looking good. All right. So, with the theory of planned behavior, what we want to do is kind of take ourselves through, again, how to read the article as well as sort of extracting and chewing on. If I were a Gen Z or early Gen Alpha person, I might say, how do we cook on this article? Let us cook. So, first thing we want to do, or one of the first questions we want to ask ourselves with any of these research articles, and particularly these large-scale theories with lots of applicability across lots of different specific research project situations, is what do I need from this article? Right? We're not just reading these articles for the sheer joy of reading technical writing. Relatively few people regard that as a joyful experience. It can be. Every once in a while, you're going to come across an article that just absolutely blows your mind. Metaphorically, you're going to be having chunks of your skull up and playing jigsaw with your own cranium as your horizons have been expanded. But often, it's a much more mundane or pedestrian experience of reading the article. So, on Monday, we had a chance to just briefly introduce ourselves and describe what our graduate work is, what's my thesis or dissertation about. Give us the 30-second elevator pitch on what you're doing.
My name's Shauna. I'm in the Peas lab under Dr. Peas, and I'm studying the invasive impacts and also natural disturbance impacts to endemic endangered rodents.
Okay. More things key largos? Mm-hmm. Cool. So, this class is all about human behavior, and that sort of presupposes the question of how do non-native invasives get to northern key larva? What human dynamics and presence moderate that, meaning influence it to be worse or more intensive or more aggressive, or downregulate it, moderate it in the sense of, okay, this is a problem, but it could be worse thanks to human presence and dynamics here. Okay. Sorry, you were going to say?
Oh, no, I was just saying it's predominantly the Burmese python, so that's a very exotic pet trade introduced species.
Burma's a long swim from northern Key Largo, whether or not you're a flat earther, right? So, yeah, we have a lot of complex questions in each of our research areas to tease apart. And so these big theories are an effort to try and, like we talked about on Monday, try and simplify down, abstract away some of the weird and unexpected quirks and irregularities in how we think about managing invasive pythons as they're released by folks who, they get too big for the terraria, or they decide they don't want a Burmese python after things like that, or whatever. I don't know. Burmese python like felines. But anyway, we want to ask ourselves, what do I need out of this article? Okay. So, to the extent that you have a clear sense of what your project's research question is, that's a fairly easy question to answer, right? So, ultimately, if it's an amazing article, but it has 0% interface with what you are trying to solve, your time and energy are a zero-sum budget. For every second you spend on this article is a second you can't spend on another one that might be more useful. So, in reading these articles, we want to maybe just sort of propose a bit of a framework on sort of why to read the article, and then how to. So, what's my purpose? And implied need for this article. And then we're going to get into quick skim or scan. Again, for PhD students, this is not an unfamiliar process for you. But we're going to, from there, ask ourselves after this quick read through, just reading even just the section headings of a journal article, not any of the actual content, but just like paragraph headers or section titles, that sort of thing. That's going to give us a quick 30-second to 2-minute preview of where is this article going, what's the perspective or stance or interpretation of the data that these authors are adopting. And then from there, we can make a quick decision after just a couple of minutes of investment of, okay, is this just worth a quick evaluation, and do I sort it out? I don't need to see this anymore. From here we toss it, log it, or prepare to do a deep, actual, slow, mindful read. Okay. And so there are lots of different sort of encapsulations of this framework, of this process for reading an article. And most articles are going to give you at least 3 levels of provision of what is in the article, right? So for pretty much every article out there, you're going to see the web summary, 1, 2, 3 sentences on what is this article about? What's the content? What's the value of this article? The next level up at around anywhere from 100 to 300 or 400 words, we're going to have the abstract. And then from there, especially now that we have mostly, thank God, or flying spaghetti monster, whatever your particular faith is, we're not as constrained by physical print restrictions, word counts, and fees for publication of things like color graphs, black and white graphs, stuff like that. Like that used to be this huge sort of shackle on what you could jam into an article. We don't have to worry about that so much anymore because everything is just a PDF now. It doesn't matter how long it is. Now we can have extended abstracts up to a few thousand words. Now, in the economy of writing journal articles, typically an abstract, again, 150 to a bit over 250 words. An extended abstract can be up to a couple of thousand words, which is a loose analog of 1 to 3 or 4 pages long, right? So it's the very short version of the entire article, and the way that you and I can, at the tail end of your thesis or dissertation writing, construct an extended abstract is to go through and for every paragraph in your manuscript, your thesis, right? Extract what is the most important one sentence, cut or copy and paste those in order into a fresh document. What's the most important sentence in this paragraph in order? That's more or less my extended abstract. That's about 90% of the effort to get you to writing your extended abstract, a year or 2 from now. Okay? And then beyond the extended abstract, we have the article itself, right? So the deep, full read. And beyond that, we have a wider community of science, providing things like critical reviews, which we've now seen, and so forth. Okay? So, several different levels to look at when you're trying to figure out what and how much and how intensively do I need to extract out of this particular potential key to the success of my study. This previous work by somebody else. Okay? So we want to, for any article that makes it beyond the throw it in the I've seen this but I don't care about it pile, to the I've seen this and I care a little bit about it, and so I'm just going to make it maybe as far as the extended abstract, maybe not. I'm just going to throw this citation and 1 to 2 sentence summary of how it's useful to me specifically right now into something like an annotated bibliography, which is just your list to yourself of every article that I've ever seen and how is it useful to me, right? We are externalizing, getting out of your brain all of that stuff. And for most things that you read, it's just going to be the citation information so you can find it again. And a 1 to 2 sentence summary, maybe you just instead copy paste abstract or the extended abstract into that your simple text document. And that way, you can trust yourself not to have to think about that article anymore and remember it. All right, so part of the professional practice of being a researcher is setting up, backing up, and then using continuously, being fanatical about getting things out of your brain so that your brain doesn't have to keep this in working memory while it's moving on to the next thing as well. Does that make sense? So if we're doing this wrong, we're going to have a whole bunch of work sort of rattling around in our heads, and we don't have any headspace, we don't have any bandwidth, we don't have any CPU cycles left for getting the next article. And for a thesis, you might be looking at a couple of hundred citations. That's too much for you and me or anybody to keep in working memory. We're good at up to about 7 things at a time, right? This is why phone numbers back in the day were 7 digits, maybe plus an area code and so forth. We can handle about 7 bits of data before our brains start to have to cache things and we start to get real lossy in that. It takes a lot more effort to remember a sequence of 8 numbers than it does to remember a sequence of 6 numbers. How much more effort then for 8 crucially important to your study facts or insights based on those facts, right? So you want to get that stuff out of your brain to an annotated bibliography. If you're taking Forestry 500, Principles of Research, this were in a previous semester, right? You've heard my sermons on an annotated bibliography, and that's all great. But if that's not something that you're doing already, and you're planning to spend more than the next few days in graduate work, get that annotated bibliography up and running. This can be hundreds of pages long, even with just short, 2-3 line entries per thing, fairly quickly, if this is your career, right? That is your Bible for everything that you've seen, your Quran or Torah or whatever, for everything that you've seen. All right, let's get into the deep reading. So, for the theory of planned behavior, we want to get a sense of what is each section of this document, this narrative, this story of how somebody else thinks this thing that this paper is about is useful to other people. That's why they're publishing it. What does each section of the document put front and center in terms of importance, right? So the introduction of a research article is going to give you sort of background, context, statement of the problem. Whether or not it's titled that, there is always, in every research article, a problem that is meaningful and important or pressing or urgent or critical that we address as a species, right? And then the rest of the article, after the introduction, is all about answering, addressing, mitigating, solving some part or all of, hopefully, that problem, right? So, in the introduction, we don't care about the broad, open first couple of sentences, preamble of, in my field, it might be something like, well, the National Park Service has a dual mandate mission to provide world-class resource protection in places like Dry Tortugas National Park, not too far from Largo and so forth, and at the same time provide world-class and top-level access to experiences to enjoy and encounter wildlife, and so forth in these protected areas. And those two goals, those requirements of that agency, are in conflict with each other. Protecting and providing access are fundamentally conflictual things. Right? Pretty much every article I've ever written has said that in so many words, because that's the inescapable tension or conflict in my field of research, recreation ecology. All the other recreation ecologists reading my articles, they already know that, right? But I gotta say it, but they already know. Right? So we gotta get beyond what are the things that I'm gonna start seeing over and over and over that I'm seeing them so much they're not particularly valuable for me. So we're looking for, in the introduction section, what's the problem? How serious is it? And what can be done? Right? Those three things are typically always in the introduction section, whether or not there's the word introduction titling the first several paragraphs of any research article. That's going to be the thing. With theory of planned behavior, right, it is useful and important for us in studying lots of people together. Sociology instead of a psychological approach, studying an individual. It's useful for us to understand why people behave the way that they do. So the theory of planned behavior helps us have some tools to do that. And Aichen says basically that in the introduction. The second fundamental section of any research article is going to be the literature review, right? And when we see a whole bunch of citations in the introduction, and sometimes they're run right together, blended together as an introduction and lit review, nobody's really surprised by that, right? So none of our research is in a vacuum. And what they are doing, conceptually, in every article, including this one, they're saying, all right, if everything we know about this particular problem space, the issue that we've identified previously in our introduction is the problem space, this study here has eliminated this part of it, right? So we can use kind of a Venn diagram of overlapping circles to look at this conceptual space. This other article studied something real similar, and they found pretty much the same thing, but they drilled down harder on it, and we think that's pretty useful to the issue we've identified for this study. Now this other group, or this other previous maybe body of theory, overlaps with what these other two said, but in some ways seems to disagree with what those previous two studies said. And it actually moves the focus within this problem space over to this other area adjacent to what these other two studies were talking about, right? So in the story, the sequenced narrative of what we all know and what other people have done in this problem space, right, we get kind of this. Now, sometimes we'll have a bunch of closely clustered ideas and things, and so we'll talk about those together. And sometimes it's very important to identify, hey, there are other people who have studied in this problem space, this particular problem set. They totally disagree with what those other folks said. There's this whole other competing body of theory. And they are asserting things that are really pretty different and irreconcilable on the surface, apparently, versus what these other earlier folks had said. Okay? So, in our lit review, we're covering space. What's our problem space, and what have other people previously, maybe ourselves in earlier studies as your career starts to progress and evolve, what have we studied in this problem space before, right? Maybe my thesis was about linking and comparing and contrasting these two. So, theory A, modified theory called A prime. Theory B, I proposed a theory to harmonize and explain the apparent differences between these two and how they're really actually talking about the same thing. They're just describing different parts of the same elephant. Because it's such a big problem space, We all have a different perspective on it, and we can actually reconcile these things, okay? So, what a good literature review is going to do is going to cover as much of this problem space in review as possible, and then, at the tail end of the lit review, your thesis or dissertation proposal should be absolutely 100% laser focused on getting to this next part. Pay attention. There's something that nobody else, that no other previous study has exactly nailed down yet. There's something in this larger problem space that's a hole in the problem space. It's an unknown area. We got B, we've got A prime, we've got C and A and all of this stuff. We know all this. But nobody has looked at this. And this is really important. Maybe these guys and gals and non-binary pals didn't get this far yet, but they had to go to A, B, and C in order to set us up for this study. Okay? So, in the manuscripts that you read, in the manuscripts, like your thesis or dissertation proposal that you write, everybody's trying to get to that question mark space in the bigger Venn diagram. Okay? So, what this looks like with theory of planned behavior is introduction. It's useful to predict human behaviors so that when you are working with or managing humans and you show up for work that day, you have any idea of how it's going to go. Very important stuff, right? This is broad, it's general, it's applicable across lots of different professions and areas and times and spaces and so forth, so it's a high-level theory. What theory of planned behavior does is it identifies this need and then identifies previous social psychological research work in the 50s and 60s into the mid 70s and 80s on things like the theory of reasoned action, which is a previous, cruder version of the theory of planned behavior, right? So we might have things like, what is any social psychological theory? What is a more specific application of general social psychological theory to help predict human behaviors, in our case in a wildland context? A previous body of theory, theory B, is going to be the theory of reasoned action, which says if we assume that humans are rational creatures, right, then we can probably depend on that rational thinking and decision-making process to understand and identify and therefore predict how people might behave given a set of inputs. The inputs for the theory of reasoned action are what? So, reasoned action. We need attitudes and beliefs, perspectives, perceptions. Okay? If we throw my best understanding of what Sarah perceives about some topic at Dry Tortugas National Park, and we ask her and other people like her about what are your attitudes about these beliefs? How hot or cold, how positively or negatively, how joyful or odious do you feel about whatever the topic is at that national park? Well, once we know those things, we can probably make some educated guesses, not be completely wrong, about how Sarah's going to behave on her trip to Dry Tortugas. And therefore, as managers of Dry Tortugas, we can take our understanding of how she and other people like her, because a lot of people are going to be like Sarah in her rational thinking. We can prepare the correct size parking lots and boat ramps and the right kinds of educational and interpretive content and all the other things that we can scale the size of the trail network. At Dry Tortugas, it would be like a sidewalk, but right, every national park has some kind of a trail network. Okay, a transportation corridor on foot. Okay? So, that's that. And then the C in the theory of planned behavior manuscript might be something like, okay, well, some folks who have worked with our previous work, our previous theory we call the theory of reasoned action, they've noted that there are some problems with it. Like, it works pretty okay as a predictor, but they found if you make some modifications to the old theory, the relatively simple theory that if we know somebody's knowledge and beliefs and attitudes and perceptions about a thing, we can predict their behaviors around that thing. A lot of other researchers took that theory and tried to apply it, and they found that there was something missing. So in previous studies, the question mark area, the hole in our knowledge on the map, was, okay, what if you believe something about a thing, but you can't behave in the way that you want to there? What if Dry Tortugas is an amazing national park, but you have a phobia, a thalassophobia, a fear of the open ocean that prevents you from going there? You can think all the wonderful thoughts about Dry Tortugas that you want to, but if your body has a physical, overriding panic reaction getting on a boat on the open ocean, well then, it doesn't matter what you think or feel about Dry Tortugas, you're not going to go, right? And that's totally valid, right? Panic is a limbic hijack